But yes, I just do want to confirm something. We really are in a series called Prepper. We did that thing. And yes, I actually designed the graphic, and I had the audacity to put camouflage in the background. This is really happening, okay? Just in case there was any doubts. But what I've learned through the years is it's actually pretty difficult to over-communicate. And I don't want to make assumptions this morning that we all remember the purpose of the series and where we're going. So let me just reiterate a little bit about the goal and the reason why I felt like we should have a series called Prepper. I started out this series by saying I believe that 2024, this year, has the potential to get a little dicey. I don't think you have to be an Old Testament prophet to see that. I think you can look around at current events. I mean, golly, just the fact we have such a contested and heated presidential election coming up is just enough for you to look and go, hey, there's the potential for things to get dicey. Now, I don't know. I hope they don't get dicey. I don't want them to get dicey, but I'm just saying that's what I see. Not to mention the various issues happening in our country and around the world right now. Several wars happening. Things just seem to be stirring as a whole. So in the midst of these things, what I really felt called to do for our church body, for those of you who follow us online, is just to anchor us in a reality of being prepared. And let me tell you what this series is about. It's very simple. We need to be prepared for whatever 2024 throws our way and be prepared for the return of Jesus. So just very simply, there is a clear twofold purpose in this message: to be prepared for whatever happens in 2024 and to be prepared for the return of Christ whenever that happens. Now, here's my desire. I have no desire at all to be a sensationalist or to be an alarmist, but I actually believe this. I believe this whole idea, this concept of being prepared, is actually a biblical concept. It's a biblical mindset. It is wise for us. So I want to talk about real life preppers. You know, people who prep in real life. Maybe there's some of us or some of you in our midst. You know, I think that I've mentioned throughout this series people who prep and the things that they do. And I think we have something that comes to mind. If I ask you to think, okay, what do you think about when you think of a prepper? I have a feeling you're thinking about a picture that looks a little like this. Okay? Is that kind of what you were thinking? What about this next picture? Maybe it looks like that. Facts. Someone said facts. I agree. And by the way, if you're wondering where these photos came from, it's from the Googles. I went on and typed in food pantries for preppers. Those are real prepping photos of people who are preparing. But see, I think we can look at those photos, but here's what I'm interested in. I'm actually really interested in what are you thinking when you see photos like that? You may think, man, that is utterly ridiculous. These people are driven by an irrational fear, and they're just storing up things it's ludicrous. Others of you may think, actually, you know what? I think that's super reasonable. Gosh, that's even wise. In fact, I think when Michael's done preaching today, I'm going to Walmart and I'm going to buy every bag of rice on the shelf. So I'd be fascinated at how we view that in this room. But I think for a lot of us, we look at that and go, that is strange. But why do we think that is strange? Now, I think it's strange in the context of our current reality as citizens of the United States of America. And let me give a little clarity what I mean by that. We live in the most prosperous nation in the history of the world. Now, you may think back to ancient civilizations with gold and all that. They did not have heating and cooling and flushing toilets. So hello, you keep your gold bars, I'll keep my flushing toilet, and I'll keep my AC, okay? We live in the most wealthy, prosperous nation in the history of the world. In fact, we are so prosperous and so wealthy that we have this luxury. You know what this luxury is? We have the luxury to actually lean in and to become focused on comfort and convenience. I mean, we are a nation of so much plenty, we have this luxury of thinking about comfort and convenience. Now, let me give you an example. I love Costco. I really do. As I explained to my wife, I'm like, honey, when you're getting to my age, near 50, Costco is a Disneyland for middle-aged men. I go to Costco on a very frequent basis. I try to go weekly, but we're trying to cut back so we don't spend money. But I was at Costco a few weeks back, and you know, they have people who come there, vendors who are selling Traeger grills and people who are selling knives. They have these specialty vendors that come in, and they had this guy that was selling high-end massage chairs. Now, right now, you think you know what I'm talking about. You don't know what I'm talking about. Because I've never seen anything like, it was like a space capsule. These are $10,000 massage chairs. They cover every aspect of your body. They cover your hands, your arms, your legs. They wrap over on top. They are wonderful. So I was there and I talked to the guy and he's like, "You want a demo?" And I was like, "Do I want a demo? Are you kidding me?" And I'm not kidding with you. He sets it for 20 minutes. The couple next to me buys it and they go to the front and they're gone for like 15 minutes. So you're saying, "Well, Michael, wait a minute. Are you telling me you were in a $10,000 massage chair in the middle of Costco with people walking by and staring at you?" And I would say to that, "Oh, yes, I was." Well, didn't you get embarrassed? Aren't you a little insecure? Guys, I have 3 kids, a minivan, and a bald spot. I don't get insecure. I was living my best life. It was amazing. Sitting there getting massaged, and I'm like, this is really funny. My daughter and my wife come over, and they just look at me, and you can just see, oh my gosh, is this really happening? And it was happening. And I said, "Look, it's okay because I'm in heaven right now." But my whole point is this. We live in a country that people are spending $10,000 on massage chairs that are wonderful, but they're full of comfort and convenience. We have so much abundance that we can just focus on stuff like that. And with that being the reality of where we're at, there is a high probability that we've never experienced something. And that something I'm talking about is a word, and that word I'm talking about is a word called scarcity. If you're not familiar with that word, let me just give you a definition, okay? Scarcity is this. It is the state of being scarce or in short supply. It's also a concept in economics that means that the demand for goods or services is greater than the availability of goods or services. Now, if I lost you, don't worry. I'm going to explain a little further. Let me just give you a very simplistic explanation of scarcity. It just means this. It means you're in a deficit. You're in a shortage. You're in an undersupply. You're in a drought, okay? You get it. The point is you don't have enough of what you need, and when that happens, you're in scarcity. Now, it may be difficult for some of us to relate to actual real scarcity, but I would propose to you that's not necessarily the case. In fact, I'll give you an example. Let me beam you back to April 2020 when you walked into the Costco's and you were looking on the shelf for toilet paper. We experienced scarcity. Now, I've never been able to figure that out. But the fact was this. If you had a stockpile of toilet paper in the pandemic, you were a baller and a shot caller. In fact, you were like this guy right here, okay? I mean, you're just living your best life. You're like, it doesn't matter, if you have this or that. If you had this, you were literally wealthy in April of 2020, living your best life, okay? So, one reason preppers are called preppers is they're known to store up on items that you need in order to live that could potentially become scarce. Extra water, non-perishable foods, essential items, something that you'll need if the stores go bare and you can't find it. You could have all the cool gadgets and the gear that you want, but if you don't have food and water, who cares? But on the other side of scarcity, you simply have more than you need. You have an abundance. You have so much so that you can lean into comfort and convenience. So at this point in this message, you may be thinking 2 things. You haven't mentioned any scripture, Michael. It's bothering me. 2 is, where in the world are you going with all of this? Here's the point. You want to be prepared for whatever 2024 throws your way. If you want to be prepared for the return of Christ, you need to store up on the essentials for your life. You need to be ready in your own life to have your life storehouses full, to your life to be fully stocked. See, preppers tend to have a reputation of storing up on items that could become scarce, but I believe the Bible teaches us a very simple, similar principle. Let me take you to a parable of Jesus, a story of Jesus that points us to this truth. And I'm going to give you the right context of where this story is found, because in this story that Jesus is about to tell, it's found amidst many other stories about the return of Jesus and what we need to be like and how we need to behave as we look for his return. This is found in Matthew chapter 25, and I'm going to just break it down verse by verse. Let me read verses 1 and 2. Matthew chapter 25, I'm reading out of the New International Version translation. Here's what it says. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise. So let's just break this down. Let me back all the way up to that first phrase, at that time. At that time, the kingdom of heaven. Well, what is he talking about? At what time? He's clearly referring to a time in the future when Jesus will return, future events that will occur. He says when the kingdom of heaven, meaning the reign and the rule of Jesus on this earth, starts to happen and become fully realized, when I come back, here is what it's going to be like. I'm going to give you an example, an analogy, a story. And then he talks about some bridesmaids waiting for a groom. What is that about? Well, in order to understand this story, you have to understand the historical context in which it was shared in. Let me share with you about what Jewish weddings back in that day, what they would look like. See, what would happen is they had these great wedding ceremonies, these lavish parties. And the groom would have his groomsmen, and they would march along, typically after dark, to the bride's house with the bridesmaids, and they would gather them, and then there would be a large procession, again, that typically happened at night, and they would go back to the place where the wedding ceremony is, and they would have a giant feast. They would have a major party. And that's what's happening here. We see the bridesmaids are waiting for the groom to come. The groom will come and get them and the bride, and then they will go into the wedding feast and have a party. So these bridesmaids are waiting for the groom to come. And here's what we know. We know there was 5 that were wise, and there was 5 that were foolish. Well, why were 5 of them wise, and why were 5 of them foolish? Let's read to find out. In verse 3 through verse 6, Matthew chapter 25. It says this. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. Now listen, the bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom! Come out to meet him." So very clearly, there's the implications that the groom, who represents Jesus in the story, is coming at night when it's dark. Now, if you're going to have a wedding procession that's marching to a place to have a party and it is dark, they don't have street lamps, they don't have those things. They have little oil lamps that they carry, and you will need those to have this procession be safe as they go to their final destination. But here's what we know from the story already. We have 5 bridesmaids that were foolish, and they did not bring enough oil. And then we had 5 other bridesmaids that had some extra oil. They had brought some extra stores. I don't know, maybe they were first century oil preppers. There's a possibility, I'm just saying. But they were ready for whatever happened, whatever was unexpected. See, they knew that the groom, could come at any time, and they had extra oil. 5 of them did. See, and there's something critical that was just stated that you cannot miss, because it's very relevant for us in the year of 2023. The groom, who in this story is Jesus, was delayed. He was a long time in coming. His coming took way longer than we expected it to, right? Does that sound familiar? We've been waiting as Christians, as followers of Jesus, for over 2,000 years for the return of Christ. And I think many of us have become drowsy and weary, and we've fallen asleep in regards to being ready and waiting for his return. In fact, if people start talking about the return of Jesus too much, we just consider them to be a little unbalanced. I talked about this my first week in this series, where I've mentioned we've had a tendency to refer to people who talk about the return of the Lord a lot. We either dismiss them and just say, "Oh, come on." Or we say this to them. I've heard this 100 times. "Oh, people have been saying that for 2,000 years. People have been talking about him coming back for 2,000 years. But pay attention to this teaching, because we need to know what our rabbi, our teacher, what Jesus wants us to do. And what Jesus is teaching here is, listen, we need to be ready. We need to be watchful. We need to have some things stored up so we're ready for his return. So the story continues like this. There must have been someone watching out for the groom. I don't know if it was one of the bridesmaids. They were all asleep apparently. Maybe there was a watch person, a watchman, but someone heard or saw the groom was coming. Maybe there was noises in the distance. Maybe there was lamps in the distance. I don't know. But someone shouts out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Translation, he is here. Get up, get the sleep out of your eyes, get your lamps going. It is time to get the party going. Get the feast. We're getting to the feast. This is going to be a good time. He took a long time, but listen, he is here, folks. But listen to what happens next in verse 7 through verse 12. Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. They're trimming the wicks to get them at the right height so they can burn for a long time. The foolish one says to the wise, the ones that did not have enough oil, "Give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out." "No," they replied. "There may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, you go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the others also came. "Lord, Lord," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "Truly, I tell you, I don't know you." Now pay attention to that. Do you know that all of the bridesmaids got up to prepare their lamps? They all got up to prepare. But as they were preparing their lamps, half of them realized they did not have enough oil. They did a oil tank check, and it was getting empty. They realized they didn't have enough to make it to the wedding party. But the other half were not in that predicament. They were prepared. They were preppers, if you allow me to say that. They had a lot of extra olive oil, and they were prepared because they knew the groom could come potentially at any hour. They were intentional about being prepared for any possible scenario of when Jesus or the groom could show up. They knew he could be delayed possibly, so they had stored up extra oil for whatever and whenever happened at that time. Listen, the five wise bridesmaids were prepared, and the five foolish ones were not prepared for his coming. And you can't miss this because Jesus is teaching us something here. Listen. Be wise, store up, and be prepared for his coming because it could happen at any moment. See, it's not just a good idea or a nice suggestion to be prepared for his coming. It's not just a good idea to be stored up on what is necessary. Jesus is teaching us here to be prepared, to be watching, to be waiting, and to be ready. And this is important because Jesus tells us why it's important. See, there's more at stake here than just being prepared or not being prepared. There's more at stake here than just being taken by surprise or taken off guard. So those that had their lamps filled up were ready to go to the wedding feast. But those that did not have extra oil, they had to go down to the Dollar General and see if there was olive oil on the shelves. And they went down there and they realized there's some scarcity. There wasn't a lot of extra olive oil at the dollar store. But they finally find a store, they go to the CVS and they get some from there, and they finally come back and they realize the wedding party has already departed. In fact, not only have they departed, they've arrived to their destination, and they have gone into the wedding feast, and the doors are locked. So what would you do in that situation? I would do exactly what they did. I would go to the place of the party. I would knock on the door and I'd say, "Hey, we got our oil, let us in." But that's when the story takes a little turn. It's a little different at this place. See, they came back and started beating on the doors, but the groom was not going to let them in. He no longer wanted them at the celebration feast. They had bought oil and come back, but the feast was already well underway. The doors were locked. And the groom did not want them in because they had not been prepared for his coming. And it even gets ramped up another notch. And this is intense. The groom, who is Jesus, says this, I don't know you. What do you mean you don't know me? My name's Tina. I'm friends with Tammy. Tammy, the one who's getting married. You know me. But that's not what's happening here. The groom is saying, I don't know you. You've missed the party. You've missed out. In the very last sentence of this parable, Jesus really drives home his primary emphasis and his primary point in this teaching. This is the whole purpose of Jesus telling this story in Matthew chapter 25, verse 13. So pay attention to this. This is his point. Why is he doing this story and why is he explaining this teaching to us? So you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour of my return. So very clearly, Jesus is giving us a warning and a command. Hey, you need to be on your watch. And I think when I look at this parable and story, there are two very clear aspects of keeping watch. One aspect is just be prepared and waiting and looking and be on alert and be leaning into that. The other aspect of being prepared in this story and being watchful is having enough oil in your life stored up in your own lamp. See, two very clear, distinct things. Now, what does this oil represent? Are you sitting there thinking, man, I think I need to go to Costco after this message and go buy some oil? I can't explain to you why Costco keeps coming up during this message. I am not compensated for advertisement with them, I promise. But see, once you dive into this story, if you go look at commentaries and study Bibles and do a deep dive, you'll start to realize this, that the oil in those lamps, that oil that's in our life, can symbolize and represent a lot of different things. There's a lot of different interpretations. Now, they don't differ radically. They're all kind of in the same category of having a life that's lived for God in such a way that you're ready for his return. But the main point here is this: regardless of how one interprets the oil in the lamps in our own life in this story, it's this. Here's the point. Some people's lives are ready for Jesus because they have stored up and lived out the right things, and some other people are in a spiritual deficit and they are not ready for his return. They're experiencing spiritual scarcity. You just simply don't have enough oil in the tank. So again, let me go back and just drive this point home. What is this oil that we need to have stored up that Jesus is talking about? What does it represent? Well, again, I think there's various interpretations, but I'm going to give you a few things in my study and in my heart that just resonated with me as I was praying through this message. Some things that I believe we need to have stored up and prepared in our own lives. Here's the first one. One way to ensure you have enough oil stored up in your life is to live a life of obedience to Jesus. Now, if you've heard me preach often, you'll realize there's a reoccurring theme. I use that word obedience often. And I use it very intentionally. I use it because you don't hear it a lot being taught as much as you should these days. But if you go back and you're a student of the Bible, and you're a student of Jesus' teachings, and you're a student of the New Testament, you will begin to see a dominant theme of obedience to Christ is an expression of our love for him. And you'll hear me say this again, I've said it many times, many of us want Jesus as Savior, and I am in that camp also, to be clear. But not everyone wants to make Jesus the Lord of our lives, where he becomes the one who's calling the shots. He's the one who lays out the template of what it looks like to be a follower of him. He's the one that we give our lives to in willingful surrender to be obedient to his ways. But I would propose that's what love for God actually looks like. Now, it's not just a service relationship, it's a love relationship. But out of that love relationship, we truly do want to be people who are obedient to him. So I would propose to you, would you be able to say today, in terms of having this oil in your life stored up, is Jesus calling the shots in your life right now? Or have you chosen to be the captain of your own destiny and the captain of your own ship, and you're the one who is controlling everything in your own life? If that's the case, I have good news for you. I'm not here to attack you or push against you. I'm here to invite you into a better way of living. The best way of living is this. Listen, I have a lot of regrets in my life, but every time I have said a strong yes to Jesus, followed by intentional action, I have never regretted those times. Obedience to Jesus may not be easy, but it is the best thing that you can do for your life. It's the way you can store up oil in your life to be ready for his return. Point number 2 on ways we can store up oil is another way to have enough oil stored up in your life is to continue to persevere in your faith through trials and difficulties. You know, you'll hear me here not preach the prosperity gospel or Jesus is here just to give you a life of blessedness and he's going to give you a jet and everything is going to be great. I do believe this with all my heart. I do believe the only good life, the only prosperous life, and I mean that word not financially but holistically, is only found in Jesus. I believe that with all my heart. There is no better life worth living than a life fully surrendered and dedicated to pursuing the person of Jesus as he pursues you. That is the only thing that's worth living for. But here's what I do know. Again, if you're a student of the Bible, I know one thing that is promised, unfortunately. You are promised trials and you're promised difficulties. Meaning, life is going to happen to you. I know a handful of people in this room right now that are just navigating some really difficult things. If that's you, I'm sorry that you're going through that. But I want to tell you something that I've learned. I think sometimes we don't value this endurance and perseverance as much as we should. I believe God, when he looks at people who have chosen to persevere and endure under intense trials or difficulties or even persecutions, that he holds that in the highest of esteem. I believe that we undervalue that. We don't magnify that enough because you know why? It's not flashy, it's not cool. You know, we tune in to watch the 100-meter dash. We don't tune in to watch a marathon for 5 or 6 hours straight. Just not as exciting to see, right? But I think God values perseverance greatly. And here's what I want to tell you. Do not give up on God if you're going through it right now. Do not give up on Jesus if you're going through it right now. Do not give up on him. He will not give up on you. He is faithful. He loves you. He cares about you. Too many people are giving up on God when they hit a hard wall. Too many people that I know I see leaving the faith or just drifting away because when trials come, they have not been tested or proven. Allow God to buffer you and to test you and to refine you, and you will find out something as you push through the other side of it. You have had oil stored up in your life for pressing through and being faithful in trials and tribulations. Number 3. You will have enough oil stored up when your love for the Lord is still burning bright. I really should have made that the first one now that I see it on paper. See, and here's the reason why that should have been the first one. This relationship with God, our faith as believers in Jesus, as Christians, should be founded and rooted in love. It starts off very simply, a love for God, which then reciprocates in us being able to love others, the 2 greatest commandments that Jesus gave us. So this whole Christian faith is rooted in love, and our lives should not be lived out. When I talk about obedience and pushing through trials, you can do that on your own effort, on your own strength, and there's times we have to reach in and do that. But what Jesus is calling us to is to push through those things, through trials and difficulties, to live a life of obedience, not out of dry duty and obligation, but out of a love for him. Listen, you'll do a certain amount of things in your life out of religious obligation. But I take a bullet for my family because I love them. You'll do more for love than you will do for dry religious duty. And can I just speak frankly with you? I think any pastor could say this at any church at any given time. There are those of you in this room who know Jesus in a very exchanging relationship. It's like a business transaction. I go to church, read my Bible every once in a while, do some good things, then you live your life. It's not the picture that Jesus paints. Jesus paints a life where we fall in love with God with everything inside of us. And he becomes the center that everything revolves around. And from that place, we do these things, not out of obligation, but out of a sense of we know that the only well of deep life is found in a life rooted with Jesus. So let me ask you a question. Is the flame of love in your own life, is it still burning bright? Where maybe one day it burned like a clear, bright crystal flame, but now is it a smoldering wick? You know, if you look in the book of Revelation and you look at what Jesus says to one of the churches, he rebukes them. He says this, he goes, you have lost your first love. Church, have you lost your first love? Have you lost your first love? Could you honestly, with integrity this morning say, I love God more than anything? I don't say that to condemn you. I don't say that to make you feel guilty. I say that to invite you back into the reality that the good life and the only thing worth living for is Jesus Christ, the risen one, the coming King. He's the only one who is going to satisfy. And that relationship should be birthed and reciprocated back and forth out of love because he loves you more than you can possibly imagine or think, regardless of what you're navigating right now. Regardless if you went out and got wasted last night, you slept around and you're here this morning, Jesus loves you and he wants to transform your life. There's nothing better to live for. Let your love burn bright again. And here's the good news. Your love for him can be reignited. Well, how do I do that, Mike? Just get real with God. Like, stop playing games. Hey, Lord, I used to burn for you. People used to say I was on fire. I'm just not. Going through the motions. Lord, I know that's where I'm at. Would you ignite in me again, Lord, a love for you? Would you meet me where I'm at? I feel broken right now. Would you meet me in that broken place, God? Would you reignite within me just a fresh hunger and a love to pursue you, Jesus? That's where you start. You just get really real with God. And guess what? When you live a life rooted in a love relationship with him, you know what you'll find? You'll find oil stored up in your life. So bear with me because I'm about to take a turn on you. And you're going to wonder, okay, did he just go from scriptures to a TED Talk? I already know this, but I assure you I am not. I assure you I'm going to tie these things together. So bear with me as I take a little bit of a turn here, okay? Let me ask you this question. In what areas of your life are you experiencing scarcity right now? Let me put this in the context of the story we just heard. In what areas of your life are you lacking enough oil right now? In what categories of your own life that if you run out of oil pretty soon, you're going to be on an empty tank? And if you're on an empty tank in one of these areas of your life, clearly you will not be prepared for whatever 2024 throws your way. I'm going to give an example of what I'm talking about. I don't want to be vague here. I'm going to introduce to you a tool for me that has been useful throughout the years to use to go back and kind of evaluate where I'm at in life. I don't think initially this was a Christian tool. I've modified it, and you'll see how I've modified it to be something I feel is more in line what we should be like as followers of Jesus. But it's a tool called the Wheel of Life. Would you go ahead and put that up there? So you'll see the way I modified this wheel of life is at the center I put the spiritual aspect. And as followers of Jesus, our lives should revolve around a relationship with Jesus. Everything else should flow out of that place. But in this wheel, what it does, it breaks down very simplistically these major areas of your life. Let me just read through them real quick. There's the physical, the family, the career, the financial, and the social aspects, and the intellectual. Again, as I've mentioned, the spiritual is at the center. That's a relationship with Jesus as followers of Jesus. But here's the point of this. This is a wheel, right? And if any one of these areas go into a massive deficit, or you get a flat, you run out of oil in any one of these areas, that wheel will not roll. And you'll find yourself in a crisis. You'll find yourself with a flat. Let me give you some examples to hopefully bring some clarity as to what I'm talking about. Maybe you've just been spending money like crazy, charging up credit cards, not budging, not paying attention to it, and you hit a wall financially, and you go and your finances become just crashing down around you. You were not prepared enough, and now you find yourself with a flat in this financial area of your life. You're in a financial crisis. Maybe you've ignored your physical health and you've had this gnawing feeling, I need to go to the doctors, I need to get this thing looked at, and you've just put it off and you continue to eat and do whatever you want. And I'm kind of talking about myself at this point. I just went back to the doctor and I was really happy and bragged to my wife, I'm adulting now. I went to the doctor. I'm a big boy. I'm not good with that stuff. But we've been eating whatever we want, ignoring health issues, right? And all of a sudden you get that diagnosis and you hit that wall and then your physical health has a flat. Or maybe you become so focused on your career that you've ignored your relationships, you've ignored your family, and you come home one day to realize your wife has had enough. She's fed up. You have a family crisis. You have a relational crisis. That area of your life has become a flat. I could go on and on and on. In each one of these scenarios, there's a million different possibilities of how you can have a deficit, how you can go into a flat. But I know this. I know God cares about each of these areas. I think one thing we do in Western Christianity is this. We unintentionally compartmentalize our lives. Let me be clear. This gathering this morning, singing songs and hearing the word being preached seems spiritual to us. We may go to lunch with some people afterwards, and that's not as spiritual. And then when we get to that job that we don't quite look forward to on Monday morning, that's definitely not spiritual. And we unintentionally compartmentalize our lives into things that are overtly spiritual, such as getting up in the morning and reading the Word, and to things that are not as spiritual. And we like to compartmentalize things. I don't believe God, when He looks at us, is doing the same thing to us. I don't think He's chopping up our lives into these little sections. I think God looks at us in a holistic way of expecting us to live a full life in every aspect of this wheel to be glorifying Him and living for Him. None of these areas, if you're a Christian, should be off limits to God's access in your life. See, here's the thing. You need to know something. God cares about each of these areas. I want you to know. If your relationships are falling apart, your friendships at school are not going well, there's some family difficulties you're navigating that are really difficult. Family stuff can be so hard to navigate. God cares about that stuff. If you're dealing with health issues, do you believe God cares about that? I sure hope He does, because we get a ton of prayer requests about praying for physical healing or physical issues. God cares about your body. God cares about your family. God actually cares about your finances and how they're handled. God cares about your physical health and your choices. God cares about each of these areas. He cares about your social life. Do you know that? He cares about your friendships. He cares about what's happening in those. Jesus is deeply in love with you. He cares about each one of these areas. And here's what I know from experience. Each one of these areas, if brought into a deficit and you go into a flat, you will not be prepared for whatever 2024 brings your way. I'm going to invite the worship band back up. So here's where I want to land and wrap up this message today. I want to ask you something. What would hinder you from having enough oil stored up in your life? What would hinder you for not being prepared for whatever 2024 brings your way? See, it takes courage to be honest with yourself and honest with God. But I've never regretted a moment when I've chosen just to look at those hard realities and those hard truths, to bring Jesus into that space and allow Him to speak to my heart. Would you put up that last slide, Sam? So here's the question I want to leave you with. In what areas of your life are you experiencing scarcity right now? And maybe you immediately know, maybe in your heart and your mind, immediately God is just showing you what that looks like. Maybe it's just blatantly obvious to you out of just common sense. You know what's happening. But maybe for others of you, you need to lean into this. And I think the Wheel of Life is a decent tool to lean into what area of your life maybe God be asking for you to invite Him into. See, sometimes we get scared and we want to close the doors of certain areas of our life. God, you can have this area. God, you can have that area. But don't touch this. Don't touch this. But Jesus is knocking. He's knocking. He doesn't want any area of your life to be off limits. And if you let Him in, what you're going to find is this. He's good. He's faithful, and he brings life wherever he goes. Would you stand with me this morning? I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and bow your heads if you would. We're just going to take a moment, just one moment to respond before we sing together. I'm going to ask you the question again. In what areas of your life are you experiencing scarcity in right now? I'm going to pray for us. Just stay in this space. Father, I ask right now, by the power of your Holy Spirit, would you speak to us and show us, Lord, any and every area where we may be running low on oil, any area, Lord, where we've been afraid to allow you access to. Lord, would you allow us to be prepared for whatever comes this year? Lord, prepared for your coming. Lord, would you bring life into places in our life that are broken, that we're scared in right now? Holy Spirit, right now, would you show us what those areas are? Would you show us this week as we lean into that? We trust you. We choose to trust you with our lives. We choose to trust you in living a life of obedience. And we ask, God, that you would fill our lives up in such a way that we would not be lacking oil in any area, and it would be for your glory. Everybody said, amen. Would you sing with us today?